In the luxurious lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel, amidst glittering lights and the bustling sound of footsteps, Zoe Johnson was meticulously scrubbing each tile on the floor. She never dared to slack off, especially under the strict supervision of manager Richards, infamous for his no phones during work policy, particularly for the housekeeping staff. But this time, her phone vibrated in her pocket. Her heart pounded as she saw the familiar number flash on the screen. It was the university. After 6 failed attempts at applying for a master's scholarship in linguistics, she knew this call could change her life. "Just 1 second," Zoe whispered, sneaking behind a large marble pillar, her hand trembling as she pressed the answer button. "Zoe Johnson?" A deep, clear male voice spoke in Dutch from the other end of the line. She immediately responded in fluent Dutch, her accent so perfect it was as if she had just flown in from Amsterdam that morning. They discussed her application for the international program. Zoe anxiously explained that it seemed her motivation letter hadn't arrived on time. "Mijn motivatiebrief is te laat reingekomen, heb ik gehoord." Her voice carried a hint of worry, but she remained composed. Suddenly, the atmosphere around her turned eerily silent. She looked up and nearly dropped her phone. Standing just a few steps away was none other than Richard Coleman, the billionaire owner of the hotel chain, watching her intently with an unreadable expression. Beside him, manager Richards glared furiously, as if he had just found the perfect excuse to lash out. Zoe stammered, quickly ending the call in Dutch. "Ik bel later tot ziens," and shoved the phone back into her pocket. "Johnson, my office, now." Richard's voice was icy, slicing through the air like a knife. Zoe felt her heart plunge into a deep abyss. The hallway to the basement felt twice as long as usual, each step echoing with the judgmental stares of her co-workers. Some pitied her. Others seemed almost pleased. She was the only black woman on the housekeeping team with a college degree, something Richards always acted as if it didn't exist. What would you do in that situation, when a precious opportunity suddenly arrives, only to be treated like a mistake? Imagine being Zoe. Would you have picked up that call? For 6 long years, Zoe Johnson had quietly cleaned room after room, saving every penny toward her dream of earning a master's degree. She relentlessly submitted job applications only to be met with silence after each hopeful in-person interview. Yet every morning she still showed up early in her clean uniform, standing tall, eyes filled with determination, as if no injustice had ever happened. Then the phone at the front desk rang. "Zoe Johnson, HR wants to see you," announced Jennifer, the head receptionist. The HR office was on the top floor, right next to the executive suite, a world far removed from housekeeping. In the elevator, Zoe disappeared among people in expensive suits discussing million-dollar deals. No one even noticed she was there. The doors opened. "Johnson," the HR director called out, "please have a seat." Zoe sat down, stiff, a sinking feeling in her gut. Was she being fired? "Mr. Coleman wants to see you." A simple sentence that sent her heart racing. Richard Coleman's office, owned by the billionaire behind this luxury hotel chain, was larger than her entire apartment. At 45, he was known for turning failing hotels into premium gems. And now he was sitting across from her, not with disdain, but with genuine interest. "Dutch, French, Italian, and Mandarin, correct?" he asked, flipping through her file. Zoe was stunned. "How did you know?" "I asked HR to send me your file immediately after I overheard you speaking yesterday," he said, tapping lightly on the folder. "Honors degree in linguistics from Georgetown. Fluent in 6 languages, 2 of which are Asian. And you've been cleaning my hotel for the past 6 years?" Zoe was speechless. But what she didn't know was the phone call that day was no coincidence. Behind that Dutch conversation was a special connection, a link that would spark not only a personal transformation, but also expose a silent system of discrimination that had long concealed true talent. Have you ever felt underestimated? Ever been pushed aside simply because you didn't fit in? If this story stirs something in you, keep reading, because sometimes one phone call can ignite a powerful shift, even one the most powerful people never see coming. The room fell into silence. Zoe remained seated, her mind spinning with everything she had just heard. Richard Coleman, the man she thought didn't even know she existed, was now looking at her as if he truly saw her, not as an invisible cleaning staff member, but as a person with rare intellect and resolve. 6 years, Coleman repeated, folding the file and crossing his arms. May I ask why a Georgetown graduate was scrubbing hotel bathrooms instead of working in international translation? Zoe took a deep breath. I sent 47 applications to the hotel's international relations department. Never got a response. I also requested internal transfers 12 times, and every single one was denied. Who denied them? Manager Richard and Monsieur Metmouk, the general manager. Coleman jotted down both names without changing expression. That's interesting because Mr. Whitmore is always complaining about our shortage of multilingual staff for international guests. His eyes narrowed thoughtfully, especially during conferences with Asian partners, where cultural communication nuances are crucial. What he didn't mention was that 3 months ago, he quietly hired an independent consulting firm to investigate the unusually high turnover rate of non-white employees at hotels across the East Coast. Zoe, I'll be honest, he said firmly. Tomorrow, the business summit with Dutch and Chinese investors begins. I need someone fluent in both languages, who also deeply understands their cultures. Zoe narrowed her eyes, half skeptical, half amused. And you want me to clean their rooms? Coleman chuckled softly and shook his head. I want you to temporarily serve as the international relations coordinator for the event. The pay? $5,000 0 cents a week, starting today. Zoe nearly dropped her handbag. That was more money than she had ever dreamed of making in 3 months combined. Why me? There must be hundreds more qualified. Because I heard you speak Dutch like a native. Because you have the credentials I need. And because I suspect something is very wrong within my company. An hour later, Zoe stepped into the elevator with a new staff badge, granting her full access to the hotel system. On her way to HR to complete onboarding, she ran into Manager Richards. The look of shock on her face was unmistakable, like she'd seen a ghost in broad daylight. Johnson, what are you doing on this floor without your uniform? Richards snapped. Mr. Richards, I'm the International Relations Coordinator by direct appointment from Mr. Coleman, Zoe replied calmly, her eyes steady. That's impossible. You don't have the right qualifications. Honors degree from Georgetown. Fluent in 6 languages, including Mandarin and Dutch, Zoe interrupted, maintaining a professional tone. My file has been in the hotel system for 6 years, along with 12 transfer requests. Richard stood frozen, her lips moving as if to say something, but no words came out. At the HR office, Zoe found an unexpected ally, Zoe Williams, a newly hired recruitment analyst who had quietly been observing everything from afar. Zoe, it's about time, Williams said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I saw your file when I first started and couldn't understand how someone with your qualifications ended up in housekeeping. I tried to speak with Mr. Whitmore, but he cut me off immediately, she sighed, shaking her head as she helped Zoe finalize her transfer paperwork. That afternoon, while preparing documents for the VIP conference room, Zoe stumbled upon something that stopped her cold. The Chinese translation in the conference materials was not only grammatically incorrect, but also used language that could be considered offensive in a formal business setting. Without hesitation, she revised the entire translation, redesigning the welcome materials with precise and culturally sensitive language. "How'd you know this translation was wrong?" Coleman's voice came from the doorway, where he had been quietly watching. The previous version used terminology inappropriate for professional Chinese business communication. The translator may understand basic language, but they clearly lack cultural depth, Zoe explained, eyes still fixed on the screen. "Have you ever wondered how a single mistranslation could jeopardize a multi-million-dollar deal? Language is power, but that power needs to be in the right hands." Coleman nodded, his expression distant and thoughtful. "Whitmore assured me he hired the best translators, and paid a fortune for it." "Or hired someone without checking their credentials or experience," Zoe replied flatly, pointing to a critical error in the translated partnership proposal, a mistake that could easily be misinterpreted by the partners and lead to serious consequences down the line. On the day of the conference, Zoe emerged transformed, professional, confident, magnetic. She moved through the crowd of international executives like she was born to be there, seamlessly switching between Dutch and Mandarin, facilitating conversations and resolving misunderstandings that would typically take days of negotiation to untangle. During a break, someone approached her. It was Whitmore, the general manager, who hadn't bothered to greet her even once in 6 years. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Johnson, I'm truly impressed. It seems Richards may have misjudged your potential." "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore," Zoe replied smoothly. "It's remarkable how a resume clearly listing fluency in Mandarin was completely overlooked, especially when the hotel spent $50,000, 0 cents, on subpar translation services for this event." The smile on Whitmore's face froze. "There must be some misunderstanding. I have receipts confirming every email I've sent over the past 6 years," Zoe interrupted calmly, "including the ones flagging major translation errors and materials used for Asian events." What Zoe didn't say was that Zoe Williams, the new recruitment analyst, had granted her access to the hotel's translation contract records. The translation firm was owned by Whitmore's own niece, a person with no professional Mandarin training, yet charging premium rates as if she were an expert. Worse still, all previous translations contained similar errors, mistakes that could drive international clients away and cost the hotel millions. On the third day of the summit, something unexpected happened. A Dutch businessman suddenly recognized Zoe. "Wait a minute. Are you the one who wrote that incredible study on linguistic variation in international business for the Journal of Applied Linguistics?" Zoe nodded, surprised. "Yes, that was me. I've cited your work at 2 international conferences," he exclaimed, excitedly calling over a few colleagues to meet her. From a distance, Coleman observed the scene and noticed Whitmore's face growing increasingly pale. What Whitmore didn't know was that while he continued smiling and chatting as usual, Zoe had been quietly weaving a network, not for personal revenge, but to expose a deeply flawed system, one where talents like hers were buried, while lucrative contracts were handed to those with no real qualifications. No one at the Grand Plaza Hotel realized that the black woman cleaning floors, the one who had been reprimanded for answering a phone call in Dutch, wasn't there by accident. Behind what appeared to be a simple job transfer was a calculated plan, one not only designed to change Zoe's life, but also to uncover the injustice affecting dozens of others. The question was no longer whether she could prove what was happening, but rather how destructive the truth would be once exposed. On the fourth morning of the summit, the atmosphere at the Grand Plaza was unusually lively. The preliminary contracts Zoe had helped coordinate had exceeded all expectations. As she walked through the lobby, head high and eyes shining, something strange made her stop. Zoe froze as she saw Whitmore leading a young woman into the executive elevator. The girl looked visibly nervous, clutching a folder labeled Final Translation, Official Contract. "Miss Whitmore, your Chinese translation is acceptable," Whitmore said evenly, though clearly trying to maintain composure. "No need to be so anxious." Zoe didn't need to hear more. The last name Whitmore was unmistakable. A quick glance as they passed confirmed what she had long suspected. The serious errors from before were still present in the materials. "Mr. Coleman needs to know about this," Zoe told herself, and hurried toward the CEO's office. She entered without knocking. Coleman looked up from a stack of papers, startled. "Zoe, what's going on?" "Whitmore is secretly replacing my accurate translations with error-filled versions created by his niece," she stated, showing him photos of the documents on her phone. "And I have proof that this has been happening for years." Coleman shot up from his chair. "Are you sure?" "I've archived all the files. I even found the invoice for that translation company. 3 times the market rate, while qualified candidates like me were repeatedly rejected." Just then, Zoe Williams from HR rushed in. "Sorry to interrupt, but I found something you need to see immediately," she said, handing him a thick file. It was the recruitment data from the past 5 years, clearly showing a pattern. Non-white candidates, especially women, were systematically eliminated. Coleman flipped through the pages, his expression growing colder by the second. The external investigation suspected something, but this is a deliberate system, he said slowly, his voice sinking. Right then, Whitmore barged in without knocking. "Richard, the Dutch are ready to sign, but they're asking about some inconsistencies in the translation. I think Johnson's confusing things." The room fell into a heavy silence. Coleman calmly stepped outside and closed the door behind him. "Thomas," he said, voice low and ice-cold, "I'm looking at a $50,000 0-cent invoice for a useless translation while my qualified staff member was cleaning toilets. Care to explain?" Whitmore turned pale. I don't understand what you're talking about. We hired the best people." "Your niece," Coleman cut in. "She has 0 experience with professional Chinese translation." "She has a certificate, Whitmore stammered. "Fake," Zoe interjected, placing a printed email on the desk. "I just confirmed with the Beijing Language University. They never issued a certificate to Ashley Whitmore." Whitmore glared at Zoe with pure hatred. "You're just a janitor who thinks she can infiltrate the elite." Zoe stayed calm. FPD, in Applied Linguistics from Georgetown, 6 international publications, all documented in my personnel file. "You've already lost, and more than once," Coleman said coldly. "I've called an emergency board meeting in 30 minutes. By then, I expect your resignation on my desk." "You can't be serious." Whitmore laughed nervously, his voice trembling. "Just over this? Just because—" "Choose your next words very carefully, Thomas," Coleman warned, his tone low and icy. 2 hours later, the executive conference hall was packed. Every manager, supervisor, and department head was present. In the front row, Dutch and Chinese business executives watched curiously as the unexpected event unfolded. Mrs. Richards, the housekeeping manager, sat among familiar faces, visibly shaken and confused. Coleman stepped onto the stage with Zoe by his side. Today, we uncovered a system of organized discrimination and abuse of power that has cost this company millions of dollars, he declared firmly. For years, managers like Thomas Whitmore and Sarah Richards have quietly implemented unofficial policies that caused serious harm, not just to our employees, but to the company's interests. Behind him, a large screen lit up displaying charts. Employee qualifications versus job placement, recruitment and rejection data broken down by race and gender, and inflated service contracts tied to management's relatives. Mrs. Johnson, who many of you knew only as a janitor, saved this company from a diplomatic and financial disaster this week, Coleman continued. She corrected a dangerously flawed translation that could have caused major misunderstandings in international agreements. Several Asian executives nodded in agreement. A few even applauded discreetly. As a result of these findings, Thomas Whitmore is officially terminated for misconduct, Coleman stated without hesitation. Sarah Richards is suspended pending investigation, and effective immediately, we will conduct a full audit of our recruitment and promotion practices over the past 5 years. The room fell silent. Miss Richards looked pale, eyes fixed on the floor. And finally, Coleman said with a faint smile, I am proud to announce Dr. Zoe Johnson is officially appointed as Global Director of Internal Communications, overseeing all multilingual operations across our hotel network. The room erupted in applause. Some were hesitant, but many, especially the housekeeping staff in the back rows, clapped through tears, as if witnessing an impossible dream come true. As she stepped off the stage, Zoe saw Whitmore being escorted out of the building by 2 security guards. His face twisted with powerless rage. As he passed her, he hissed, "You won't last a month." Zoe simply smiled calmly. In the pocket of her new blazer was a recording device, the very one that had captured every threat and racist comment Whitmore had muttered over the past few days, in a last-ditch effort to cover his tracks. That night, in her new office, its windows overlooking a city glittering with lights, Zoe finally allowed herself to cry, not out of sadness, but deep relief. 6 years of mopping hallways while her skills were ignored. 6 years of hearing, "We must have misplaced your file," or "You may not be the right cultural fit." She picked up the phone and called home. On the other end was the voice of the mother who had sacrificed everything for her daughter's academic dreams. I did it, Mom," Zoe said, her voice breaking with tears. But what no one at the Grand Plaza Hotel anticipated was that the real transformation had only just begun. As old privileges crumbled, some clung to denial. But others began to accept an undeniable truth. The people once deemed invisible were now standing tall, and they were never going back into the shadows. Real talent, once unleashed, doesn't just correct past wrongs, it redefines the future. The downfall of Thomas Whitmore and his discriminatory system was only the opening chapter of a sweeping reform, a shockwave that not only shook the Grand Plaza, but began to ripple across the American hospitality industry. And it all started with a phone call in Dutch. 6 months had passed since that fateful day, when Zoe dared to answer a call in the middle of the hotel lobby. What had started as a personal quest for justice had become a quiet revolution, peeling back the glossy veneer to expose deep-rooted inequity in a multi-billion-dollar industry. On the 32nd floor, Zoe's office now overlooked the dazzling skyline of Manhattan. A small brass nameplate on the oak door read, Dr. Zoe Johnson, Vice President of Diversity and International Relations. Her salary? 5 figures a month, but true power, wasn't in titles or pay, it was in the ability to create lasting change. "The restructuring task force is assembled and waiting," came a familiar voice. It was Zoe, her executive assistant and close friend since the summit. "All regional managers are connected online." Zoe nodded, took a deep breath, and stepped into the boardroom, where Richard Coleman and the full board awaited. Today was the official presentation of the Invisible Talent Initiative, Zoe's personal campaign to identify and elevate employees whose abilities had been overlooked for years. "The results have far exceeded expectations," Zoe began, displaying the data on the screen. "In just 6 months, we've identified 147 employees with expertise in languages, finance, management, and technology, all working in roles far below their actual capability. Of them, 83% are Black, Latinx, or from other underrepresented groups." Coleman nodded in approval. This was the first condition he had set when promoting Zoe. Not just to right a personal injustice, but to reform the entire system. "Most impressive," Zoe continued, "is the financial impact. Translation service costs have dropped by 78%. International client satisfaction has risen by 42%. And our diversity index now leads the entire industry. All of this achieved by the very people already within our workforce. They just needed a chance." Thousands of miles away in a modest hotel in California, Sarah Richards sat quietly watching the live stream. After a thorough investigation, she avoided termination by accepting a demotion and transfer. She now managed the hotel laundry. A bitter reality for someone who once dismissed talent out of sheer bias. "The next phase of the initiative," Zoe announced, "will include an internal mentorship system. Each employee promoted through the program will be tasked with identifying and mentoring others with similar potential." Thomas Whitmore did not attend the meeting. His name had become a symbol of an outdated regime on the brink of extinction. After his dismissal, no luxury hotel dared to hire Thomas Whitmore again. The allegations of systemic discrimination and budget fraud had permanently tarnished his name in the industry. Rumor had it he was now working the night shift as a manager at a roadside motel in Arizona. A bitter end for someone who once wielded so much power. As for Ashley, his niece, she was forced to repay all the inflated earnings from the translation contracts. She was also required to complete a professional ethics course, and ironically was now studying Mandarin on a scholarship, funded by the Inclusive Language Education Fund, established by the Coleman Corporation. At the end of the meeting, Zoe stepped onto the stage and faced the camera, broadcasting live across the hotel network. "I want to share something very personal," she said, pausing for a moment as the room fell silent. "When I was a child, my mother worked as a housekeeper in a hotel just like this one. She had a college degree, but was never allowed to work in her field." "Zoe, no matter how hard they try to make you feel invisible, your value will never depend on their recognition." Zoe took a deep breath, steadying her voice. "My mother passed away believing that some doors would never open for people like us. She never got to see this moment, never got to witness that every sacrifice she made was absolutely worth it." In the audience, several executives, some of whom had recently been promoted through Zoe's program, quietly wiped away tears. "A company's true strength doesn't lie in profits, but in its ability to unlock human potential," Zoe continued. "For decades, the hospitality industry, like so many others, has buried talent beneath uniforms. It is assumed that people with different skin tones, different accents, or humble beginnings only belong in invisible roles." Coleman stood and began to applaud, soon joined by the entire hall, including hundreds of employees watching remotely. The sound of applause rose like a silent declaration that real change had begun. Later that day, Zoe received an envelope in her office. Inside was a postcard from Amsterdam and an invitation to serve as a guest professor at the School of Applied Linguistics, sent by Professor Van Houten, who had called her in Dutch on that fateful day and had quietly followed her journey ever since. Zoe smiled, gazing out over the radiant city skyline. A thought crossed her mind. If Richards had only given me a light warning instead of a harsh penalty that day, I might still be scrubbing rooms, and that degree would still be gathering dust in a corner. The next day, Zoe officially launched a scholarship fund for hotel employees and their children. Partially funded by her new salary, the first recipient? The young daughter of a former colleague, a little girl who dreamed of studying hotel management. It all began with a phone call in Dutch. But now, those ripples had spread far beyond that hotel, far beyond the industry, carrying a message that could not be ignored. Talent exists everywhere. What's missing is opportunity and recognition. True justice isn't just punishing the prejudiced. It's rebuilding the entire system so that bias has no place to hide. And Zoe's sweetest revenge wasn't watching those who once belittled her fall from grace. It was witnessing hundreds of people like her finally rise. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on how society's silence can smother extraordinary talent, leave a comment and follow the channel for more powerful stories of people turning injustice into fuel for real change. Because the greatest lesson Zoe left behind isn't just about breaking barriers. It's about keeping the door wide open for everyone who comes after.